Well, for starters, I'd like to thank Landon Blake for joining us again. We appreciate his contributions. Landon is a professional land surveyor in California and Nevada. He works in primarily in California's Central Valley, but I understand they have a small office now in the Lake Tahoe area. He's also a certified federal surveyor and a licensed UAV pilot, so that's a FAA Part 107 pilot. Landon owns Redefined Horizons, a family-owned surveying business focused on small private land development projects and real estate transactions in Central California and Western Nevada. He enjoys hiking, landscape photography, and computer programming. Landon lives with his wife, Monique, his foster son, Marty, and his 3 dogs in Stockton, California. With that, I'll turn this over to Mr. Landon Blake.
All right, thanks guys, I appreciate it. I apologize, I'm looking a little rough because I just came out of the field. So some of what we're going to talk about today is, I just had a refresher on it. So anyways.
Well, some of us don't have the luxury of that excuse, Landon.
Yeah, so we're going to talk tonight. I'm going to do a short section on just basic total station operations. I know that's going to be review for a lot of you guys, but we might have some office folks on here that don't get out as much. So I want to cover that. Might help on the test, or God forbid somebody's sick and you actually have to go out and run a total station. Some of that might help. So, and I've just got kind of 4 basic operations that you do at the total station. And then I've got 6 or 7 just kind of tips for running a total station. So this is, I'm going to enjoy this. This is enjoyable for me tonight because I started my own business a year ago and got reintroduced to the field after about, 10 years. And so I've been doing stupid stuff like busting rod heights and bumping the tripod with the gun on it. So my partner's ready to fire me. we were just on a job. I was out running levels Saturday morning because somebody busted 3 rod heights on a control survey we did, and I'm going to let you guess of the 4 guys out there which one of us busted the rod heights. Was yours truly. So I've been relearning the value of good procedure. Part of the problem is I get out there and I think, I'm a licensed surveyor. I don't need to measure that HI twice, and I'm the guy that busted the rod heights. So, yeah, I'm ready. I'm just about ready to get fired. So I got to get it whipped into shape. I've also been doing some pretty lame field notes. So I've come to appreciate, since I've been back out in the field, the value of good field notes. So y'all be pleased to know that my field notes have improved the last 30 days, I hope. So anyways, we'll talk about total station operation and some tips. And then we'll talk a little bit about field notes. Field notes are, this is going to sound totally lame, but a very interesting topic. I've been back and forth kind of on the pendulum over how much is enough and how much is too much. And now that I'm back in the field, I'm writing more field notes, if that tells you anything. So, but I don't think it's like when I started. I don't think going back to those days is necessary either. So we'll kind of talk about, how do you find the right balance there. I'll share the forms with you. I've got 4 forms we use. We can talk about free form versus forms and when one's better than the other. We can talk about that. And then probably the best part will be, I'll save for last, that's just some tips for monument search. So when you're doing a boundary survey, I don't know, I've got 4 things, I think, to offer. That's one thing I do okay with in the field. So I'm an okay corner hound. Everything else I'm pretty bad at, but that I do okay at. So I'll try and share some things that help me. I was very blessed I learned from one of the best guys in Central California. I mean, we dug 6-foot holes before we said it wasn't there. And that guy he was a great corner hound. So I was very blessed to learn from a good guy. So I picked up some of his good habits, and it didn't have to work out that way. I could have gone to work for a guy and learned bad habits. I was just random chance that I got a good guy. So, all right. So we'll start with total station operations. You guys can stop me anytime. If you got questions, let me pull up the chat, make sure. All right. So the first kind of key operation is the traverse. And so that's when you're going to set up and you're going to run in some of your control. And so, that's where you've got an occupy point and then a backside point. And then what you're going to do, you set up on your occupy point, you take your backside, and then you're going to turn and you're going to measure three things. You're going to measure a horizontal angle, a vertical angle, and a slope distance. So that's what's actually measured by the instrument, those three things. Okay, you turn that to your foresight point. Okay, so what that means is you have to start with 2 points, and then you set your third. Okay, and I'll give you an exception to that rule in just a minute, but that's the basic principle. And so just a couple key things. So your instrument does not measure horizontal distances. It calculates those using the vertical angle and the slope. So that's just, now the display will show you a horizontal distance, but a good surveyor knows that's a calculated value, not a directly measured value. So if you dork up your vertical angle, you're not going to have a good slope distance, right? So just want to keep that in mind. So here's the exception to the rule. So typically when you're going to run a traverse, so in my shop, usually when we show up to traverse, we always have static control that's been surveyed in a fast static survey. But sometimes we get out ahead of the GPS. So what happens if you show up on a site and you have no control? How do you start your traverse? Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to set your 2 physical points, and then you're going to assign a coordinate to your occupy point. Okay, a lot of guys do 5,000, 5,000. I don't like that because I like to tell my northing and easting apart. So I usually do 5,000, 10,000. Okay, another tip is do not pick an elevation that's anywhere near the actual elevation of your site. So, most of the stuff we do in my shop is between 0 and 200 feet. So we usually go with like 10,000 is a good elevation, or 20,000.
So we don't run on.
So do that. You assign those coordinates to the other thing is you want to try and avoid negative values too, right? Which is why 5,000, 10,000 works good. So don't do like 100, 200, because then you're going to get negative values in your northing easting. So you set your coordinate on your known point. Now there's 2 things you can do. If you don't have known coordinates on your second point, then what you have to do is what we call an azimuth only backsite. Okay, so you're going to shoot your backsite and you don't have a coordinate for it. You're just going to tell the total station to assign an azimuth to that vector. Okay, and there's different ways to do that. Some guys like to try and get their compass out and pick something close. Some guys like to pick something absolutely different from what's close so that the guy looking at it in the office knows. I'm probably guilty of using the close compass bearing, but I'm thinking I should probably not do that now because I've got some newer people in the office. I probably, so if I'm looking due north to my backside, I probably want to call it due west or something. So it's obviously wrong when you look at it on the computer. So essentially, guys, what we have now with the modern total station is it's running you can think about it's kind of running a version of AutoCAD on board, right? So it's doing all the coordinate geometry on board in the software, right? So like the little total station that we use at my shop, we don't even have a data collector. Everything's on board, right? It's got a nice color display. It works really good. Okay, so that's your traverse. So, you typically start with 2 points, or you start with one known point and a backside azimuth, and then you shoot in your control. So if you set up on 2, you backside 1, you shoot forward to 3. Okay, then the next thing you do to set your next control point is you move up to 3, you backside to 2, and then you turn and set 4, right? And then as a general rule, you'll close that figure. That gives you a good check, but you don't have to. They can be open. If you're checking into another GPS point, it might be an open traverse. Okay. Just a good rule of thumb, close your traverses. Don't get lazy. So one thing now, why would you be lazy by not closing a traverse? So it's a little bit hard to understand, but to really close a traverse, you have to turn the closing angle. Okay, so let's say you set up on 1, sorry, you set up 2, you backside 1, then you turn from 2 and shoot 3, then you move to 3, turn down and shoot 4, okay, then you move to 4. Now, you can turn and shoot 1, and you can inverse those 2 coordinates and get a check, but in order to close that, to do an angle balance on all 4 angles, you got to reset up on 1 and turn that angle. It's an extra setup. So a lot of guys get lazy, and they don't do that duplicate setup and turn their closing angle, okay? Not allowed at my shop if we're traversing. I'll be honest with you guys, we don't traverse a lot because I'm in country that's blessed with good GPS visibility most of the time. But if you're in a dense urban area or up in the Sierras or in the forest, then you might have to traverse. So if we were depending on the traverse solely on the traverse for control, absolutely no exceptions. We will close the traverse, okay? The other thing I'll tell you about traversing is a lot of this, especially the robotic total stations now, will let you turn multiple sets. So you can do multiple sets of angles at your setup point. I'm pretty anal about most stuff, but I'm going to make a confession here. The modern total stations are good enough that we don't usually turn sets. I suppose if I was working on something where the control was really critical, you know, I don't do a bunch of construction surveying. You know, if I was laying out a BART tube under the bay or something, then we'd be turning sets on our traverse. But for most of what we're doing, you know, if we're just doing control for a topo boundary, we're not typically turning sets. You know, most of the time with a modern total station, we're within a couple hundredths. I will tell you, and we'll talk about this a little more, when you're traversing, you should always have a bipod on. No exceptions. You should have a bipod on your rod, okay? So that's kind of traverse. I will also tell you, traversing is the only way we set total station control at my shop. There are other ways to do it, but that's the only way. You are only allowed to traverse in control at my shop, okay? So that brings me to the second method, second operation, which is called a resection. Okay, so resection is a little different from traverse. I hate resections. A lot of guys use them a lot. I'm not telling you you can't use them, but you're not allowed to use resections at my shop. Okay, and I'm going to tell you why. So in a resection, you set a point with no coordinate. Okay, so it's a new point with no coordinate, and then you shoot at least 2 known points, and it'll calculate a coordinate on the point that you're occupying. And it does that with a distance intersection calc. That's what the total station is doing, right? So if you're a CAD user but you're not used to the field, that's what it's doing. It's doing a distance calc. Okay? So why do guys like resections? Guys like resections because they're lazy. I don't know if you guys know this, but a lot of field surveyors are lazy. It's kind of a common trait. I know, I'm a field surveyor. I'm kind of lazy when I'm out there too. Okay, so here's why guys like resections. So if you think about it, if you have point 1 and point 2, and you want to set point 3, okay, and let's say point 1 and point 2 are intervisible, so you can see between them. Okay, the way you have to do it at my shop is you have to set on 2, backsight 1, and shoot 3. Okay, then you move to 3, right? You backsight 2, you check 1. Okay, so how many setups is that to get your 3 points in? It's 2 setups, right? Here's why guys like resections. If they show up and point 1 and 2 are already on site, they just go to 3, set their nail, right? They set 3, they set up on 3, they shoot 1 and 2 and calculate the coordinate. How many setups did they have to do? 1, okay? So that's why guys like a resection. Now here's the problem. If you've only done a 2-point resection, what's your check? You have no check, right? Because it's using point 1 and 2 to calculate the value. So let me walk you through this again because it's important. If you set on 2, backsight 1, and traverse in 3, and then you move to 3, you can backsight 2 and check 1. You have a check. If you set up on 3 and resection on 1 and 2, you have no check. That's why I don't like resections. That's one reason. Here's the other reason I don't like it, besides the fact that I don't like to indulge laziness. Okay? The other reason I don't like resections is it's really easy to mess them up. So if your angle between your occupy point and your 2 knowns is either too narrow or too wide, you're going to get a crappy result in your resection. Okay, that's called strength of figure, right? So you want those angles, you know, somewhere between 45 and 60 degrees to have a real good setup, right? So what happens is you get a guy that goes out to the site, he gets point 1 and 2, and they're almost on a line, right? And then he sets up 10 foot off line, and he does a resection 1,200 feet each way, okay? I haven't done that math, but like, you know, you're kicking around, you might be kicking around 2 or 3 tenths at your point that you just calculated with your resection because you have poor strength of figure, right? And here's the problem I've had in the past. I don't have this problem now because I run a small shop and I got a good guy working for me, but in the past when I was running 10 crews, I had a hard time trusting my crews that they would set up a good resection with a good strength of figure, right? And I told my crews, if you're going to resection, you need a 3rd point. Okay, so you can resection off of 1 and 2, but you better have a point to check. Okay, and here's what my guys would do. They would do crappy resections with poor strength of figure, and they wouldn't shoot a 3rd point. So guess what rule I had to adopt? No resections, okay? Because it's hard to cheat on a traverse. Okay, but it's pretty easy to cut corners on a resection. So here's the one time at my shop it's okay to resection. If you show up to a site and you've got 0.1 and 0.2 are in, okay, but they're not intervisible, so you can't see between them, and somebody knocked out the only other control on site, so 3 smoked, right? All right, now you don't have a choice. You got to set up and resection on 1 and 2, okay? But what I would tell you is set up on 1 and 2 from 3, shoot 4, a new point, then you move to 4, and you better check something besides 3, right? Check back into one of those original 2. So there you go. There's my spiel on resection, okay? All right, so then you've got what we do most of the time with the total station is just called a side shot, okay, or a radial tie, and that's where you turn from your back sight to your foresight point. Usually you measure a single angle, okay, single horizontal, single vertical, and a slope distance, okay? That's how we do most of our topo shots, okay? Now, occasionally you will do what they call, you can shoot a direct reverse, okay? That's where you plunge the scope. In other words, you flip the scope and you shoot it again in what they call the reverse face. Okay, and what that does, the reason you do that is that average helps you average out your instrument error, okay? Your instrument error in your horizontal and vertical circle. Those circles aren't perfect. Okay, so for example, if you set up and backside a point and turn 90 degrees and set a mark on the wall, plunge the scope, backside again, and turn, you're not gonna be on the mark. You'll be slightly off the mark. Okay, that's the error in your horizontal circle. Okay, that's why you plunge the scope. Now, I used to shoot direct reverse. Any property corners or control was shot direct reverse. I'm going to confess with you now, with modern total stations, I've stopped doing that. You know, usually we find we're checking in within a couple hundredths, almost always. Now, that's for the type of work that I do. If I was doing something critical, you know, if I was doing some control for construction layout or you know, I don't know, I was working for Caltrans and we were doing control down a canyon or something, I would do direct reverse, okay? But for most of my work, I don't, but it's a good practice if you're doing really tight work. You do direct reverse on your side shots. Now, here's the important thing about side shots, especially for boundary. You got to remember, a side shot is a radial tie. There is no check, okay? So there's 2 ways to check a side shot. You shoot it from a different setup, okay? Or you shoot it again from the same setup, right? And the second one's a little bit lame, right? Because you're not getting it's not fully independent, right? So ideally, you shoot that point from a second setup, okay? Now, that's a pain in the butt, right? But whenever we can, we shoot our control and our property corners from 2 setups, okay? If we're working with the gun. Now, you can't always do that. Sometimes you get a property corner that's it's in the bushes or it's down the alley and you can only shoot it from 1 point. And that's okay, but here's my rule. I only do that if I can calculate a good record coordinate on that property corner from a record map, okay? Because that gives you a check. Now, let's just say we're out in the boonies and I'm making a shot to a section corner and the only thing it's on is the GLO plat. We're shooting that puppy from another setup, right? Because the GLO plat's not good enough to tell me if I got a bust on my side shot, right? So you got to think about that when you lay out your control, right? You got to think about that. Okay, so there's some rules for side shots. Okay, then the last thing I have, and I've never actually done this, I might have done it in college, but I've never done it in the field. So I'll be curious if any of you other folks do it. But it's called run and line. Okay, so if you got to run, you know, I don't know if they used to do this when I'm out and I see those desert highways and they're straight for like 20 miles. I don't know if they used to do it this way, but you set up on a point, you back sight, you flip 180, okay? You set a mark, plunge your scope, back sight, turn again, set another mark, split the difference between your marks, that's the middle of your line. You can run straight line like that for a long, long ways, okay? Now, sometimes you get an obstacle online. You can actually turn a deflection angle, go a distance, turn that same deflection angle and distance and end up back online. Like I said, I've never done that. I don't know if people still run line like this anymore. You know, with with GPS and good control, everything might be done radially. I do know in some construction settings, like when guys are laying out columns, they will actually occupy the column lines and lay stuff out on a line, okay? So, and I'm not an expert at construction surveying, but just to let me explain that a little bit. So if you want to run out, you've got a column grid that you're laying out on a construction site for like a warehouse or stadium or something, okay? You don't spray those points out radially, okay? Because that's got all your angle error in it. So what you do is you set your first 2 points on your baseline, okay? Then you set up on those points, okay? And let's say your column lines are every 10 feet. So you got your 2 points are 200 feet apart. You set up on those, and then you walk a guy down line, and he sets the nail or whatever you're setting every 200 feet on line. Okay, and the reason you're doing that is you're eliminating all the horizontal wobble, all the horizontal angle wobble on that column line, right? Okay, and then a lot of guys, what they'll do is then they occupy every one of those nails they just set on the baseline, and they turn 90s, and they do the same thing to lay out the grid intersections on each line, right? It's a lot of work. That's why column layout on a construction survey is not cheap, right? If you're doing it for like steel and things got to be really tight, you know, you're not just wham bam thank you ma'am and that from one setup, you know, in the corner, right? Spraying all that in radially. Now I don't know, the new guns are pretty good. Hit me up in the chat if you still use radial layout for all your column lines, but that's an example of when you might kind of run line, set up online to do a survey with a total station would be construction layout. Okay, so here's some just general total station tips, and I know some people have set some things in here. Somebody said something about check your rod bubbles monthly. Yeah, that's awesome. Good job. Yep, check your rod bubbles. My partner is always giving me a hard time because he thinks I'm too hard on the rods. So I'm trying to be a little more gentle with the rods. Yeah, so what I would recommend is before you do any critical work, you know, I don't know, let's say you've been doing topos for 3 weeks and now you're going to go do, you know, you're going to do grid layout, column layout. Check those bubbles, man. It don't take long to check a bubble. It really does. It takes a minute to check a bubble, right? So that's good to do. By the way, if you're going to check your bubbles, throw that in your field notes. It's good to know that you checked the bubbles before you started, right? It's good to make a note of that. All right, so just a couple things here to remember. Horizontal angles measure better than vertical. So if you actually physically look at the way a total station is built, you'll see the horizontal circle is usually double the size of the vertical circle. Okay, so what that means is you're going to measure horizontal angles are going to be measured better than vertical. So just remember that, right? You're always going to have a little more slop on your vertical. Having said that, again, modern state total stations are really good. You know, they carry vertical pretty good. We don't level much. Usually the only time we level is when I busted a rod height. But, you know, depending on what you're doing and depending on your gear, remember, it's just like GPS, right? You're going to carry some more vertical slop than you are horizontal slop, right? The only way to get rock solid elevations is with a level, okay? So what else? Use a bipod. I don't like using a bipod either, but you need to use it. So here's the rules of my shop. Anytime you're doing a control shot, initial or check, you got to have a bipod on. Anytime you're shooting a property corner, you got to have a bipod on, unless it's really, you just can't get the shot without a bipod. And we've just started doing this the last couple of weeks. We are now shooting all our hardscape concrete with a bipod because we found that when we were freehanding the curb and gutter, we were just getting too much wobble in the lines. So we're just doing it with a bipod now. And I think we're going to get better results. You know, we're doing a lot of ADA topo, and we just get a better result when we've got a bipod on. So, you know, pavement shots, ground shots, striping, we're not shooting that with a bipod, but curb and gutter, critical hardscape, control, boundary, always get shot with a bipod, okay? No exceptions. I know you think you're good. I know you think you can freehand that bubble for 10 minutes, but you should use a bipod, okay? Watch your reflectorless shots. So we use the reflectorless EDM a lot, but you got to watch that because it'll catch stuff. So you got to watch tree branches and you just be careful. I've been burned a few times. You know, I've had a shot catch a leaf 10 feet in front of my actual shot. So if it's a critical shot, you better make sure there's no branches in the way. That's some advice from a crotchety old surveyor who's been burned, right? Watch your reflectorless shots. Always set more control than you think you need. Always, 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 always. There's very few times when I get done with a job and are like, I really didn't need that control point. That almost never happens to me. Usually I'm partway through a job and I'm thinking, man, I really could have used a control point over there, right? So we were taking some shots today on a tall rod, and I was getting a little farther away from the gun than I thought was comfortable, and I was like, man, I had another 150 feet to go. And I looked over, and my team had set another control point where we could shoot everything from another setup with a short rod. I was like, all right, that's good, right? So if you don't set enough control, you end up pushing your envelope, right? You're getting too far from the gun. You're taking tall shots when you could be taking shots with a short rod, So set more control than you think you need. And the other problem is it really sucks to get back to a job and you got to retraverse because one point got knocked out and, now you don't have enough. Right? It's like, hey, set that extra control point. If all you ever do is use it for a check, that's okay, right? It's all right. Doesn't take long. If you're already set up, running your traverse, turn and set an extra point. Okay, that's just a tip. There's no such thing as a temporary work point. This used to drive me crazy. I would have field guys that would set a wood hub, and then they would go set on that hub, and then they go do topo on a wood hub, off a wood hub. That doesn't fly at my shop. We only shoot topo and boundary from good control. And that means it's been traversed, right? You don't get to side shot in a hub and then set on that and then side shot in a nail and then set on that nail and then side shot in another hub and then set on that hub and do your topo. That don't work at my shop, right? That's lazy and it's sloppy. So I used to tell my work crews, they'd say, well, we call it a temporary work point, so it's okay. I told them, I don't want to see temporary work point in your point descriptions ever again. There is no such thing. It's either control that's good enough to work from or it's garbage, right? Do not set up an instrument on a side shot point that hasn't been set properly and checked, right? Okay, so there we go. All the field guys are going to be like, man, we're never going to another one of Landon's talks again. Oh, it's just, I've been burned, right? I've been burned. Like some of these guys on here will tell you they've been burned, right? I bought concrete. Trent, you ever buy concrete? Yeah, Trent's bought concrete too. So there you go. Double check your rod heights. Learned that from personal experience. Got to run a 4-hour level loop on Saturday because I busted a couple rod heights. So I like to measure them at the beginning and the end. And like just for kicks and giggles, measure them in metric or inches at the end, right? Write it down in a different measurement unit. The other thing is watch your rod height changes. I would say that's the number one thing that's going to cause a claim on a survey is a rod height bust. And so here's what we try to do at my shop. And I'm not going to tell you we're perfect at this, but we're trying, is every time we change a rod height, that gets put in the notes. Point number, new rod height, what we were shooting. Okay, pull the notebook out of your pocket. It takes 5 seconds. Write it down. Okay, now I'm not going to tell you we're always doing that, but we're trying to do it. Okay, the other thing we try and do is we try and minimize rod height changes. Okay, so I actually run a rod that's a little bit high. I run a rod that's I usually run my rod at 6'5" because it's over my head. And if I can, I run that rod 6'5" the whole day. Okay, we try not to move rod heights unless we really have to move a rod height. Like if we can move to another setup and get that shot with a regular rod without doing an 8.5 on the rod, we try and do that. Okay, because if you're going to get in trouble, it's going to be changing a rod height. Okay, another tip. This is for I'm not saying the pros got to do this, but if you're newer chief, newer instrument person, every time you change your rod, run over and check a point. Even if it's just a topo point, check a corner of a sidewalk, run a quick embers. I'm telling you, if it takes you 2 minutes, but it saves a rod height bust, it's worth it. Okay, so here's the problem. You bust a rod, there's no way to fix it. You got to go back, right? If you bust a rod and you haven't taken a check shot on a known point, you're screwed. You are really screwed. That data is getting tossed out and somebody's making a trip back. But that's the best case scenario. The best case scenario is somebody catches it. Right now, most of where I work's flat, so we're pretty lucky we catch rod heights because we work on a pancake, right? But like if you're up in the foothills or the mountains, it's way harder to catch those rod height busts. Way harder, okay? The other thing we do is when we're doing our QA/QC on the topo is I make people run the flow lines and make sure those elevations make sense. Like, I draw me an arrow where the water's flowing, and that arrow better end at a catch basin or a drop inlet, right? So that's just a kind of a tip on the QA/QC. So Rob he's helping me explain things. Rod height bust, that's where you tell, in the instrument, you say you've got the rod at a 6.5, but you raised it to an 8.5, okay? So what that means is your points are now going to be 2 feet higher than you think, right? Than the coated elevation. That's the number one reason why you buy concrete, is because of a busted rod, okay? And like, look, here's what I tell people too. I don't care how perfect you think you are, you're going to bust rod heights. Use good procedure, right? So, and I was having a conversation with an LSIT the other day. Here's what I told him. You know, if somebody told you were 99% effective at your job, you'd feel pretty good, right? Like, you know, if my if I came home and my wife said, you know what, you're 99% awesome at being a husband, I'd be like, yeah, that's 99% is pretty good, right? But I want you to think about this. If you take 1,000 topo shots and you're 99% effective at your rod heights, how many points are you going to bust? Right? So like, it's simple math, right? You're taking so many shots that you can be almost perfect and still bust a rod by concrete. That's why you got to follow good procedure. Nobody is that perfect. Nobody is perfect enough to never bust a rod height. Just never happens. Everybody busts them. And if you got a surveyor that tells you he don't bust rod heights ever, he's lying. Okay? That's why you got to follow good procedure, period.
Hey, Jen's asking, so Jen's a college student, so she's asking what the terminology of buy concrete means. So Jen, and our story is actually, we did a boundary topo for engineering design, gave it to the engineer. We busted a rod height on the topo, on the tie-ins at the concrete and the asphalt. We've now, I just signed a change order today to quote unquote buy concrete because they busted the rod height on the same job, laying out the curb and gutter for some islands.
Yeah, so that means you're paying the contractor to redo something, Jen.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it happens.
Yep.
So Trent brought up a good point that I didn't think about, but really critical when you're doing topo for design is what they call the conforms. Okay, and that's where they're going to tie in the new design to the existing surface, right? So if you're replacing a section of street, it's where they're going to saw cut, right? It's really critical that those parts of the survey be super tight, right? Without a rod height bust, because the engineer is going to base his whole design on that. Here's something else that a lot of guys don't think about, and you have to teach your chiefs this. Because I work on a pancake mostly, which means it's easy to catch rod height bust. Here's the disadvantage of living on a pancake. Usually the drainage on our designs is really tough. The engineers really got to work hard to get the site to drain without a pump, right? And they don't want a pump because pumps are expensive. So everything's really flat. And so here's what I've learned. If you got to figure out where the water's leaving the site. So it's either a storm drain pipe or maybe it could be an outlet to a creek. That elevation is super critical. You screw that up a couple tenths and the whole site design gets foobarred, right? Gets screwed up. So when you're working in a real flat area, you got to be thinking about, hey, and you might have to ask. So, we don't tell field guys that, right? So you have to ask. If you're a good chief, you're like, hey, where's the critical tie-ins on this site? Where's the critical point that water's leaving the site? So I know, and I can, that you should tell that. Your party chief should know that so he can do a good job. So thank you for bringing up conforms, Trent. I didn't have that on my list. All right, we're going to go to field notes.
Hey, Landon, before you go off to field notes, let's just touch on rod heights again.
Yep.
Because another thing, if you're doing, say you're doing a 1,000-point topo in a day, you're running that rod, you're setting it down.
Yep.
You're plumbing it up, you're getting the shot, you're going to the next point. If you are not taking care of your rods, some rods can have a tendency for the
rods will slip.
The tension on that upper portion to get loose, and just like I said, the rod can slip down as you go. So you might start off with that rod at your 6'5" or your 5 foot or whatever you're running, and at some point it's lower by a couple of hundredths.
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
it's lower by 5, and then it's lower by 9, and then it's lower by a tenth and a half before anybody notices it.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
good practice that that I did, that I didn't invent this by any means, but the guys that I worked with for the California Department of Transportation since 1990, as we set the rods to start the morning, you set them, check the heights, and then with your pencil, you just mark a line on that upper portion, and it's right above the bubble. As you look at the bubble, your other eye can look at that line and just make sure that it hasn't moved at all.
Yeah.
And if it
We've
has, you say stop, and you move, you turn the glass away.
Yeah,
So,
we got rods with those marks. So yeah, that's a good suggestion. Since Rob's talking about, the other thing is, like, you know, you can lose 200ths on the tip if you're not careful. Keep your tips sharp. You know, they wear down or they can come unscrewed. So that somebody else said check your feet on your rod. Yep, that's good advice.
Yep.
I was thinking of something else when Rob was talking, and I can't remember what it was, but yeah, those are all good. Oh, so when I started surveying, there was only one kind of prism. Now you can have 4 different prisms, right? Different 360s, all kinds. So we always put the prism on the rod and check the rod height with a tape before we start work, right? Because different rods are set for different kinds of prisms. You know, you can't just take a Leica robot rod and throw a Trimble robot 360 on it, right? So make that a habit. Every time, lay the rod down on the back of the tailgate, pull your tape out and check it, right? Okay. All right, field notes. Do you need them? Yeah, you probably do. You probably need them. They're a pain in the butt, but you probably need to take them. How much do you have to write down? So when I started surveying, we wrote down everything, and we did sketches. Okay, I don't think you need to do that anymore. I don't think you have to write everything down. I don't even know that you have to do sketches. Okay, so let's talk about what I do think you should write down. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys my field note forms if I can figure out how to share my screen here. So, let's talk about forms versus standard forms versus free form notes real quick. So, different guys feel different ways about it. So free form is when you just got a notebook, like a graph pad, but it's a field book, and you just write down your notes. So when I started, I had to memorize the format of the field notes. So, right, leveling has one type, traverse has another type, topo has another type, GPS static has another type, and I just had to, that was part of my job. I had to memorize the format of the field notes, right? And if I got it wrong, my party chief would yell at me, okay? So I just had to memorize. So one disadvantage of free form notes is your people have to memorize the format, and there's a good chance you're gonna get 5 different types of traverse notes, which might drive you a little crazy if you're in the office. Okay, so that's the disadvantage of free form notes. You know, the advantage of free form notes is you can tackle all kinds of different stuff. It's like, oh, I ran out of the form. No, it's all free form. Okay, so the advantage of standard forms is you don't have to memorize the note formats, and you're going to get the office surveyor is going to get all the information he needs probably from the field crew, because they got to fill it out. It's like a checkbox, like a form on a website, right? Okay, so that's the advantage. You know, the disadvantage is you got to make sure you have enough printed. You can run out, you know, whatever. They're also kind of a pain in the butt to carry around. So here's what I've started doing since I've been back in the field. I carry a little pocket notebook that my partner gave me with a pen that I can just, you know, when I'm at the instrument, I can write down my HIs or whatever, right? And then when the Robin's crying that he needs a taco truck burrito or whatever, I can stop and then update my forms, okay? I transfer my notes to my forms because it's kind of hard to carry a clipboard around. It's nice to just have the pocket notebook, okay? All right, so let's look at the field note forms I've got. I've only got 4. There's not that many, and they're fairly easy to use. And these are online too, so you can download them. They're on our website. So give me a second, I'll find them. All right, Trent, I'm gonna see if I can share my screen.
Yeah, you should be good.
All right. Okay, so
thing on the free-form notes
Yep.
is if somebody's trying to remember what the free-form notes are supposed to look like, then they're spending their brain power on something that if you have the pre-formatted stuff, that it's automatic and their brain can be used for useful things in the field, like watching for safe situations, seeing if everything looks right,
Yep.
to look back and see if the stakes you just set line up, or if there's some kind of grade break that you're not seeing in your topo, that you're not recognizing in your topo before you move on.
Yep. Yeah, brain power is limited, so you want to conserve it. Okay, so here's my rule of thumb for field notes. Like, brief is better. You know, people might actually write brief field notes. It's hard to get crews to even write notes, so try and keep it simple. Okay, so here, this is my cover sheet. We do this on every survey. It's really simple, right? Job number, job name, date, party chief and chairman. What were you doing? Boundary, topo, control check, whatever. Okay, and then I just tell them, hey, give me a quick paragraph. Give me a story, right? Set on 1 and 2. Topoed street frontage on west side of school. Set on 3 and 4. Topoed street frontage and parking lot on north side of school. Set on 4 and 5. Topoed street frontage and baseball field on east side of school, right? That you have no idea, crews, how valuable that little narrative is when you're trying to figure out, look, when you're staring at somebody's raw data in the office and you're thinking, what did these guys do, right? Just give me a little narrative, less than a page. Give me the rough idea of what you did and what order, right? Makes a huge difference. That'll help me catch if you busted a point number, set a point, and it just helps me figure stuff out, okay? So that's what this is, super simple. Okay, if you want, you can put up your setup number. So this is the setup number. This is setup of the day. First setup of the day, second setup of the day, third setup of the day, right? This is your control point number. First setup of the day was on 10. Second setup was on 11. Third setup was on 15. Okay, then you just give me a short comment. Shot east side of the building. You know, shot sewer manholes on Blake Avenue. Whatever, right? Let me know what you're doing here, okay? Super simple. You got to remember, not anymore, but for most of my career, I haven't been there. I wasn't there with you. All I'm looking at is a point file or vectors and trying to figure out what the heck you did, right? So this is helpful. Okay, so that's the cover sheet. We've got one sheet for total station setup. Okay, job number, date, backsite, point number, target height, instrument point number, instrument height. Okay, you better have a check. So starting checkpoint number. Okay, checkpoint target height. What were your check results? I make you write it down. Does anybody know why I make the crew write the check results down? It's stored in the data collector. Why do I make them write it down?
So their brain is turned on.
Yeah, like, because they'll store a 2/10 by 3/10 check in the data collector. Okay, and this, I'm sorry guys, this is actually supposed to be ending checkpoint number. Okay, so at my shop, you shoot your backside in the beginning, then you shoot your checkpoint before you start. At the end of the setup, you shoot your checkpoint and then you shoot your backside. So we should always have 2 checks before and at the end. If it's a long setup, if you're shooting 400 points from one setup, give me a check in the middle, right? Okay, and then point range details, here's what I do. I do starting point number, ending point number of the range, and then the target height. So 10,100 to 10,200 at a 6.5, what were you shooting? Right, so this is the page that all your rod heights, all your rod height changes go on. I apologize, guys. Here's the ending checks. I've got the spot for 2 endings. So there's spot for 2 starting checks and a spot for 2 ending checks. We don't always have 2. We usually have 1, but there's a spot there for ending check. Okay, that's it. That's all you got for total station notes. So 1 sheet per setup. I don't want 2 setups on 1 sheet. Paper is cheap. 1 sheet per setup makes it legible. Okay. All right, static GNSS. You guys have probably seen something like this before. Job number, date. We put down the point number, the receiver ID. Okay, so we have 4 different receivers, 2 models. We put down the receiver ID, so it's 5800 rover, 5800 base, hyperlight rover, hyperlight base, HI and feet, HI and metric, because we're using mostly 2 meter fixed height rods. We don't do control work on rods that aren't fixed height, because I bust them, so we don't do it. Start time and end time, okay? This just helps if you're processing the static data in TBC, all this, you need all this information, right? To help figure stuff out. And then give me a 2-sentence monument description, right? Brass disc, rebar and cap. Now you might be thinking, why do you need that? I'll tell you why, because sometimes crews occupy the wrong point, right? So if I have something that doesn't fit and you give me a short description, I might go, oh, hey, that's supposed to be a rebar and cap, not a 60D nail. We must be on the wrong point, right? So that's why you put that in there. Okay, this is my last one, most important. This is for boundary search results. So when we're looking for corners, they get their own sheet. Okay, job number, date. Then you just tell me what's your search point number, your found point number. I want to know, how did you survey it? Was it fast static tie? Was it a double tie from the total station? Right? Just tell me what you did here, few words, okay, and then give me a good description of the monument. Okay, what you found. And that's it. That's all that goes on that sheet. Okay, so that's it. That's all I've got in my office. I got 4 sheets. Okay, it's not that much. Now, I don't do construction a bunch. If I did a bunch of staking, I might have some more sheets, but I don't. I just don't. So I do boundary topo control. Those are our 4 sheets. Okay. All right. So let me go over, I had some general tips for field notes, I think. So on sketches, I don't do sketches anymore. Here's what I like to do. We print out, we take a screenshot of Google Maps or Google Earth, and we fade that to the back. So we make it real light grayscale. And then if we need a sketch, we take out some colored Sharpies. That's great, dude. The crew can write on their control, where they put their control points. If they couldn't get a manhole lid open, whatever goes on the sketch, it's so much better than what they draw by hand, right? So that's what we do. I'm not saying you might not ever need a sketch. You know, maybe if you're doing like structural detail on a bridge or something, you might need a sketch. But for most of what we're doing, you take out a Google Earth print and you can write on it with a Sharpie. Okay, here's the last thing I've got about field notes. This is something I've started doing. I think I might have learned this from Steve Parrish. I can't remember. I'm not taking credit for it. But when I started doing boundaries now, you know, because we have stakeout and RTK GPS, a lot of times we're just walking straight to the point. And what I've started forcing myself to do now is actually walk the lines that were surveyed. Okay, so I actually walk the bounds of a parcel from point to point. Okay, and what I like to do now in my notes is I actually write down a narrative of that, just like the GLO surveyor did. I say, starting at the southwest corner of the subject parcel, walking north, right? At approximate area of northeast corner, you know, search for monument. Walking east along the north line, you know, crossed gully, whatever, right? So I want to be able to physically figure out how did and here's what I've noticed, right? Sometimes you'll miss something walking a line one direction, you'll catch it walking a line back the other way. Something you didn't see before, piece of valuable evidence, right? Fence post under a tree or something in a bush, right? Now, I'm not telling you I always walk the site both ways, but especially on land title surveys where you're supposed to find everything within 5 feet of the line, I walk those lines, man. Okay, and anytime I'm doing public land surveys now, I like to walk those lines, right? With the topo notes, if I got them, I want to walk the same line that surveyor said he walked, right? You might notice something. Okay, so that's my only other, you know, this form I've got on the screen is good for point-to-point search, but I've been doing little narratives about how I walk the actual boundaries of my parcel on a boundary survey, and I think it's a good thing to do. I think more surveyors should do it, and I need to do a better job of it. Okay. All right. That brings me to my last thing, monument search. So we'll talk about that for a little bit. Okay. So I got 4 things I want to tell you guys about monument search. Okay. And here's the most important. If you only remember one thing from tonight, I want it to be this one thing. Okay. Put away your coordinates. Put away your stakeout coordinates. Put the data collector away. Put the rover away. And just get out with your shovel and your pin finder and go look for your corners. Okay? So often, people are so glued to that data collector screen that they just miss obvious stuff. They literally trip over the actual corner getting to the stakeout position, right? So, and that's not my idea either. I think that might have come from Dave Woolley. I can't remember. But I've learned from that. So look, here's what I do. When we first do a boundary search, on a job, we don't have any stakeout. We don't bring it. Like I could calc it, but we don't. We just go out with the pin finder and sometimes I have a rag tape or a measuring wheel and a shovel, and we just go look for corners. Because here's what that does. It does a couple things. It forces us to look at occupation, right? It forces us to open our eyes. We've got a little wider search area. You know, how many guys are out there? Think about this. How many crews are out there? They take the rover to the point. They get their pin finder out. They hum a 6-inch circle, and if they don't get a buzz, they say SFN, and they go to the next point. I guarantee you that is happening, right? So just eliminate that possibility, and don't give your crew stakeout coordinates for the first run, right? Okay, so put away the coordinates for your corner search. Okay, secondly, note and survey occupation. If there's a fence next to the corner, I want you to shoot it. If there's a barn next to the corner, I want you to shoot it. Even if you don't find the corner, if it's SFN and there's a fence post there, shoot the fence post. I need to know where that occupation is on almost any boundary surveying I'm doing, right? A good boundary surveyor is evaluating occupation. He's thinking about unwritten rights, right? He's thinking about if the occupation is the best available evidence of the line. I can't do that if you haven't surveyed it and made a note, right? Okay, third thing. Don't just give me 3 letters when you don't find something. SFN is not sufficient. What do I want to know? I want to know what depth you dug your hole. I want to know what your search radius was. Was it 5 feet or 50 feet? I want to know, was there pin finder interference? Were you next to a chain link fence or a barbed wire fence? I want to know if you're at the monument location and you think it's destroyed, I want you to tell me why. So a lot of what we do here in the valley, we get block walls that wipe the smoke corners out when we're in urban areas, and then in the rural areas, we get like irrigation ditches get mucked out and the corners are gone, right? So like, look, if your search area lands right at the intersection of 2 ditches, tell me that, okay? And then boundary surveyors, for those boundary surveyors on the line, by the way, wouldn't it be nice to have some of that information on the record of survey that you're retracing, right? Like search found nothing, 10-foot radius, you know, barbed wire fence next to search look. I mean, wouldn't it be great to get that, right? I mean, usually all we get is SFN and you don't know why, right? So I've tried to start putting that information on my survey. You know, I was doing a survey, we were doing a survey up in the foothills and we had some corners. Some of them fell right on the lip of a bluff and some were like right down at the end of at the bottom of the rock fall of the bluff or 10 feet back from the bluff. Do you know how much time that surveyor could have saved me, the guy that came before, if he'd have just told me that? Set rebar, face a bluff. Right? Set rebar, bottom of rock fall. Set rebar, 10 feet back from bluff. I mean, those 3 words would have, I mean, right? It's a difference between finding the corner and not finding the corner. So that's what I've started telling my people, right? Like, hey, if we set a corner at the intersection of a creek, we're going to put that in the notes. If we set it 3 feet from the corner of the barn, we're going to put that in the notes. So I can put that on the survey. That information is hugely valuable for a retracing surveyor, right? Okay, now, let's just say you go out and you don't find your stuff. You had your measuring wheel or your rag tape and your shovel, and you didn't find it. My partner laughed at me the first time I brought out my measuring wheel. I found like 8 corners with my wheel, right? So let's say you don't find the corners. Now you go back with stakeout, right? That's when I go back with stakeout. All right, before I call it SFN, if we can get a survey grade coordinate on it, we go back with the survey grade coordinate, and then we do a really tight search, intense search on maybe a 5 or 10 foot radius, right? We look for that hum, right? So before I've called the monument SFN, I've looked for it twice. I've looked for it without stakeout, and then I've looked for it with stakeout. Now, listen, if you're doing an urban survey and you're tripping on every corner, I'm not telling you have to do it that way. You can use your stakeout, right? But as a general rule, that's how we operate. We do a first sweep with no stakeout, then we go back in. If we can't find it, we use stakeout. It doesn't have to be separate trips. It could be the same trip, right? But I think too often people are focused on that coordinate and not opening their eyes and looking around, right? So those are my 4 tips for monument searches, right? And like, look, dig the hole. I know you don't want to. I know the ground's hard, but like that's why you have a robin, right? Dig the hole. And dig it another cut. My robin over here, he's sitting over here, he's laughing because we make him like, he dug a 4-foot hole last week, right? Because we were looking for a corner. So have some young muscle on your crew to dig the hole. What about hums? What if you find a hum under the road? What do you do?
What's a hum?
Right? That's a good question, right? So here's what my answer used to be. I used to tell people, get the breaker bar out and break that pavement up and find that hum. Okay, I don't do that anymore, and I'm going to tell you why I don't do it. Because I worry about my guys getting run over. Okay, so usually if I find a hum, we're calling a timeout, and I'm figuring out what to do, right? I might have to go back with traffic control. Sometimes we can get a public agency to come and uncover the monument if we got a hum, right? But I'm really careful about hums now, right? Like if it's not a hum on a really quiet country road and I feel super safe about my crews punching a hole in the pavement, like I do not have my guys out on a busy road, crouched down on their knees, punching a hole in the pavement, right? And if that's a critical point, then maybe we got to go back and we got to have some traffic control, or I'm standing right next to them and we got our cones and signs up, and like I'm way more careful now about hums than I used to be for that reason. Everybody's on their freaking phone, man. You got to be really careful. So what's a hum, Jen says. Okay, so a hum is when a monument's been paved over. That's the favorite thing for public agencies to do in California. I don't know if you know that. I don't know what it's like in Nevada, Trent, but in California, our agencies love to pave over monuments. So they just come in and lay down 4 inches of asphalt. Sometimes they do it right on top of the monument well lid. They just pave right over it. And so when you go to look for that point, there's nothing at the surface, but your metal detector's getting a hum either on the lid, the Monwell lid, or on the rebar or pipe that's underneath, or the axle, whatever it is, right? And so you've got a hum there. Now, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I tell my crews, hey, if you can take this, that's a safe shot, shoot the hum.
Some people call them buzzes.
Okay, some people call them buzzes, Danny said, yeah, buzz hum. I tell them, hey, shoot it. Now, am I going to hold the hum as the corner of my whole boundary survey? No, but it might be a check on a solution, right? So I tell them, hey, shoot the hum, and I need to know that it's a hum. Don't shoot it and tell me it's the found pipe if it's a hum, right? But you can shoot it and put hum or buzz, right? And then we'll come up with a plan of attack. I'll be honest with you guys, this is a real challenge for us. We pave over a lot of monuments in my neck of the woods, and road safety is a huge deal. So I don't know how other surveyors are handling that, but hums are a challenge for sure. For sure, hums are a problem. Rob, I'd be curious what you think about that. What do you do if you get a hum, Rob?
Do I unmute? And like you said, first priority is going to be safety. Can we get that? Can we get that in a safe manner? And then what resources do we have available for us? So, and now I don't have the resources that I used to have, but there are times when we'll work it out with the resident engineer on a project and say, hey, this wasn't resourced in the initial portion of this project for a thorough boundary search, because this project is 10 years old and it was less a requirement then. And we get the contractor to come out, do traffic control for us, bring a jackhammer, pop that asphalt up and find what's there, find the original. If it's fitting what we're expecting for a location, absolutely. Dig that up, perpetuate that, file a corner record, and then either reset something if it's going to be in an area that can be safely occupied in the future, or we've gotten away from resetting a monument on the surface and just using the reference points that we set, setting 4 ties around the intersection to perpetuate that monument and comply with the law. I rather see, let's say it's Trent's daughter Heather running a retracement and has to go find a monument that's on the center line of Flamingo and Las Vegas Boulevard. Do those intersect, Trent? Okay. And I don't want her in the middle of that road 10 years from now or a week from now. Let me set 4 RPs around that monument that she can tie those in and come up with the position for my corner record on the location. Also on your forms for your monuments found, you said earlier paper's cheap, so I just requested from the division chief that I just retired from to email me our found point form that we use at Caltrans District 11. And well, Raul, he's one of our District 11 guys. It's the best district in the state, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Yeah.
I'll get that sent to Trent. He can post it up along with your information.
Yeah.
But it's a single sheet per monument, so people
Yeah.
can write those notes like, you know, what you found or what it was or what you didn't find and why. Maybe your search coordinate and the radius and the depth that you dug. You had the 4 things to talk about boundary, and I don't remember who told me this saying.
Open that door for me.
When they said it, it was like, wow, that's something I got to take to heart. And that was, if you believe that you will not find the monument, or you believe you will find the monument, you're right. Whether the monument is there or not, you're probably right. Because if you don't think it's there, you'll take the metal detector, you'll try and get that buzz, that hum. Nothing here. And you won't even put a shovel in the ground. Unless you got somebody like some of us who have been there and done this, and that say, no, you will put that shovel in the ground because we're going to dig to find it. And if you think it's got to be there, I'm in the right spot, everything looks right for coordinates, for the search coordinates, I'm going to dig till I find it. One of my crews, one of the guys that I used to work side by side with, called me up and said they dug for a monument off of Highway 76 near the Fallbrook area of Southern California. They dug a hole 6.5 feet deep to find the monument. And the reason is it was there once. And when you looked at the area, it was it was in a part of an alluvial fan where the runoff from the hillside above was coming down and just depositing material over the years. And when they buzzed it, the first thing they got was a little bit of buzz and just a hint. And they started in. And what they found was the top of a T-post, about 2.5 feet down. And the T-post was just the witness that was set out to show you where the monument was. And they were like, well, this is not going to be pleasant, but we know it's there, you know? Yeah, it's really critical. Jesse White just said drop a magnet with every monument. Yeah, when I was setting my own pipes and tags, I would go to not the grocery store, but the drugstore, like the Thrifties or the Walmart or whatever, and just find little like 1/2-inch diameter round refrigerator magnet type things, but just the magnet, nothing on it.
They make
And
every
pipe I set, a magnet would go in, and then the tag would go in on top of it. So if somebody can't find points that I set, they're not there.
Yeah. Okay. Trent, I know my wife is screaming at me, man, and I got to run and I got to get home, but hopefully I did all right giving you guys a quick.
Yeah.
We could talk 2 more hours about boundary search, but that's some
of course.
rough field stuff.
Yeah,
Yes,
no, you can.
Steve,
We'll continue just normal conversation, but if you want to jump off, go for it.
All right. Thanks, guys, for listening.
thank you, Landon. Appreciate you being here. Say hi to Monique for us.
All right, I will.
Thanks, buddy. Thank you. Thank you, Landon.
Steve wanted to chime in, and
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
always willing to listen to Mr. Parrish.
So Kent Scully is the one who asked that question, and Kent's just studying land surveying. He's changing careers, so that's why I teased and let Steve. Steve, what's your longest time you've ever spent looking for a corner?
5 weeks, 5 weeks with 5 people, 5 days a week. That in the private sector, I know that. And we dang near got fired with the Forest Service when we did it. And the unfortunate thing is the 5 of us that were looking for this very critical corner in the panhandle of Idaho, none of the 5 of us found it. What happened was there was a very dedicated forester that knew how important it was to find this one corner that, as it ended up, it was only 500 feet away from where it was supposed to be. But it was in the ground, and I won't go into the long story of where it ended up, but it was there, it was found, and it was control, period, 500 feet away. What happened was we would leave ribbon out in our circle. We just were turning every rock, every piece of, but you know, we were in brush up to our knees. And so, you know, it would have been easy to miss, but we had some good things to get us there. We knew it was along the side of a creek that was along the side of a railroad that ran east and west. And the distance we were looking was an east-west distance. So, you know, it was a line there, and we were pretty narrow in where it was at. So we left ribbons behind, and this forester came out every weekend after we had given up, and he'd spend however he was satisfied with going a little further than us. So we had given up at the end of the 5 weeks. Marshall Fulkerson, a late excellent surveyor friend of mine, he died back in 1983. He got a phone call from that guy on a Sunday afternoon. He said, "Marshall, guess what we just found?" And he kind of told the guy, said, "What?" "We found your monument." And what it happened to be is in the panhandle of Idaho, way back during the CCC days, and I wasn't a member at that time, but you know, they had what they called the blister rust clearing project, and that's a very bad, nasty plant that, you know, wipes out everything else. And so there were crews out there clearing that stuff up and burning it, and they were trained that when they found a monument, they went ahead, if it was in poor condition, and we know we're talking in the 30s when the CCCs were out there, so a lot of, you know, wooden posts and rocks and stuff. And they found this one particular monument, and they had the wherewithal to sink a galvanized iron pipe with a plumber's cap on top of it and stamp it, because there was a bearing tree hanging out over the river that they were able to pull off from and remonument that. And they also then left little yellow slips behind of a record of every one of those, and they were still on the forest. So we knew what we had to look for. And he just went 50 feet further from where we gave up, and there that monument was. And but it's a long, interesting story. I'm not going to bore you as to how it got so far off the line. The geolo, you know, they messed up, found out they were 500 feet off when they tried closing, and so they just picked up, went 500 feet west and started over. And, you know, who would know? Because we had the section corner, the quarter corner, and a pointer with those 2 alone to get to the next section corner. And we just couldn't figure out why we couldn't find it. So we just started searching. But when we realized there was a 500-foot shortage closing to a range line after they got around the lake, that gave us a hint. We better go west, young man. One other, if I might, while I'm on, talking about when we hit the process of using jump over the evidence equipment, such as electronic distance measuring. Another good late friend of mine and a great one in the BLM, Kenny Witt, Chief of Cadastral, Colorado. Kenny was hit in a parking lot and killed. And I remember Kenny giving us a talk one time that our advanced cadastral survey, and after the BLM came into the world of electronic distance measuring after the Forest Service, but When they finally started getting distance measuring equipment in the Colorado State Office of the BLM, they were so excited to be able to jump from ridge to ridge and catch an opening up ahead and not have to get on the dang ground and work their way through. Well, it cost them quite a bit of money on one particular job because they were bouncing from second corner to quarter corner, second corner to quarter, and they got in and started subdividing the sections, only to find out that somebody along the line had been setting a few 16th corners between the quarters and the sections. And there was private land involved, and they did a good job of it, plus or minus a few feet, and it had been missed. So Ken just put out a mandate. Sure, you can jump over the topo calls, you can jump over those things, but by golly, you're going to walk that line, you're going to examine it as you go through, and you're going to particularly look where there might be a private individual that set a corner for some private land that's attached there. So, you know, looking to the sky is not always the answer. You've got to sometimes get down on your hands and knees. And if you've worked in places like I have in northern Idaho, in places where we call dog hair, you cannot walk through it. Probably the one time that I'll never forget, I caught up with my crew up there to come in and give them a hand. They had just started and we were heading for a coordinate search area down the hill, of course, carrying our traverse. And I caught up with the crew at noontime. We grabbed a little lunch and there were three of us there, one on a chainsaw, one grabbing the brush as he was cutting it down at ground level to walk to get through there. It took us 2 hours to go 100 feet down that hillside. And we had to bring the debris back out and stuff it up the hill because there was no place to even stuff it there. We did find the corner eventually down there, but that dog hair came after fires and then that real thick, dense stuff comes through, but the monument's out there someplace. Go find it. So somebody asked, how long do you search for a corner? Just a little sage advice. An old Arkansas guy that I worked under for years, and Landon talked about working under some good people to begin with. And I worked under people that just said, there's only one thing you know when you don't find a monument. You did not find a monument. And that doesn't mean it isn't there. So Larry Young, the late Forest Service surveyor, later state surveyor for the state of Arkansas, caught up with me one day when I got him to come on out, give me some sage advice in the second year of my career. And I couldn't find a particular HES corner. Again, I won't tell the whole story of what went on, but after I asked him, he finally did the getting warmer, getting colder thing. Is he knew where it was. He had found it when we first walked in. He walked away and sat down under a tree. And later I was looking and getting exasperated. And after I found it and seen what he had looked at, I said, well, Larry, how long do you look for a corner? And that's exactly what he said. He said, you look for it until you find it. And then he paused and he grinned. And he says, or until you feel comfortable that the person coming behind you probably won't find it either. And that's not guaranteed. So that's my soapbox for today.
So, hey, Trent.
It's always a good one. Yes, sir.
Early story, when I first started surveying here in Nevada back in the early 1970s, I was on a job. We were traversing around a section and tying the section corners and stuff. It was a fairly urban, but kind of bordered by a rural area. So we traversed into the area where a quarter corner was supposed to be located. And I went back into the office and said, hey, we didn't find the corner. And my boss looked at me and he said, you didn't find the corner? This guy that said it, I know he said it. I said, well, it's in the middle of an alfalfa field. He said, go back out there, take your shovel out and dig. We dug down 4.5 feet and we found that damn corner. Now, I still to this day don't know how it got buried 4.5 feet, but it was there. And so that's where you learn the lesson that, you know, you, like Steve says, you don't stop looking until you find it or until you're sure it's not there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was it Ryan, or Ryan had said something, or, oh no, it was John. John said staff went out and found a point 2 feet away from another coordinate surveyor. So yeah, it's just, again, search until you feel that you're never gonna, no one else is ever gonna find it behind you. So Very strong advice on that one. There was a lot of good stuff in the chat that we didn't really kind of touch on there, but throughout the whole night. So hopefully everybody kind of caught up with that as we went through. So where's Jesse White? Jesse, you still on here? Or did he take off? He looked like he was chomping at the bit to talk earlier, but he looks like he's off. What else? Anybody else want to kind of chime in on some stuff? There's obviously tons of good advice on.
Trent,
Yep. Yes, sir.
would it be worthwhile or a little fun sometime in the future, just without anything technical, to throw in a bunch of interesting pictures of a real effort at finding different corners, where you find them and the evidence you find? And, you know, I think of things like one place up in Idaho where it was out in the middle of an alfalfa field. It was an HES corner, and they set a memorial. For those who don't know what a memorial is, it's a object that you place underneath a monument after you dig the hole, that a lot of geolo did in different cases. And so we're out there, and I got pictures of the rancher out there looking over our shoulder, wondering what we're doing, digging a 3 foot by 3 foot by a 2.5 foot hole in the middle of his hayfield, until we got down and found a rock with a cross on it. And I got pictures of it all. And so, you know, how far do you go? But number one, yeah, we use coordinates to get there, but then how big a circle do you look after you get there? There's a lot of hints as to maybe how big your circle should be, depending on, you know, what you're going after. With 300-foot bus and a geolo a rectangular survey, okay, that's a different story. With a typical 2 or 3 foot circle of closure error in an HES or a mineral survey, hey, you got a pretty good chance of digging down and finding that wooden post or that marked rock or something of that nature. So
yeah,
kind of future will think of just putting a little picture thing together, and I got lots of them if you feel like that's appropriate.
Yeah, you know, I one of the subjects I had put in that email was that I wanted to do from like boundary control law type stuff is you found 2 corners, you know, now what type of situation. So it might fit well into that segment that we kind of wanted to do on that. So that'd be cool. Yeah, Zach, that depends a lot of times on some of your state laws as well. How do you handle it? Looking for backyards. Tread lightly. we've talked about this, I think, on a few different episodes as well. But is there who can talk about the California right of entry? Anybody confident enough to kind of talk about California right of entry?
Yeah, I think I can. This
there
is
you
Lee
go.
Adams.
Go for it, Lee. Yeah.
This has been back, especially with CLSA, and I mostly am Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside area. The right of entry was kind of an issue. So there's a bunch of pamphlets that were printed up, and I still have a couple copies of those. I don't know if Rich has got access to, I think they had a few boxes and stuff, but it's a statement of right of entry and what to do about it. I know that I've, you know, being in the Southern California area, and that's another thing real fast with Steve, was that in Southern California, if you start looking for section corners and stuff, you have a 30 to 50 foot radius that you need to look around in most of the time. So that type of thing. And that's just in general. But we went through this, I would say, going on maybe 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and they printed up flyers, and I understand that even the state board has copies of them. So, and they, you know, give you information as to right away, and you know how to present yourself and who to talk to and that type of thing. So, you know, that's about what I have on it.
Yeah.
Rob may have something more on it. He may have talked about it at the state level.
Yeah, Leaf, I appreciate you jumping in. If nobody stepped up, I was gonna pick on Jocelyn as one of our new LSs, or maybe Raul as our hopefully one of our future soon LSs, but you covered that pretty well. One of the things that um, I think is critical to our ability to do proper surveys is our ability to have right of access, and not all the states have it. So it's another significantly critical issue that our state organization went to bat to get this into not only the Land Surveyors Act, but also the Civil Code. And most importantly, because if some property owner has a problem with you being there and you just absolutely must be there, somebody's going to be calling the cops. And when the local gendarme shows up, he doesn't have the LS Act and he doesn't have the Civil Code. He has the Penal Code. So in California, it exists in all three locations. Land surveyors are exempt from trespass, and it's under the trespass code, the exemption for land surveyors. And so there's another reason for if any of you are not members of your state association, to please join.
Yeah.
And can Trent put the pamphlet in the linked in the chat now?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Go for it, Kat.
I was just gonna say we mostly our land guys, but all of our field crews have the the right to entry business cards. We make sure they have them on them at all times for this exact reason. But I don't think I realized that there's a radius. I don't know the details of that. I figured just if they were on a property corner, I don't know, they can go so many feet out. I guess I just didn't really understand.
It's not really defined as a distance. It's right of entry.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So if I have to get to your back left corner, I may have to go through the gate on your front right corner to get to it. Now, there's a portion of somebody can read it in the actual pamphlet, but it says to make contact with the homeowner or the resident if it's practicable, which means possible and practical. And it could be a situation where you can generate more business for your firm. If somebody wants a survey on this particular street, and it's not that they're fighting with their neighbor, but that they're going to put up a new barn or whatever the hell they're going to put up, right? And if your search area that you're anticipating is going to cover this whole block or this 3-block area, maybe you send mailers out or drop mailers into the flyers into the mailboxes or on the doors of all the residences and say, our surveyors will be out there to do work in this block, in 2 weeks. If you would like your property surveyed at that time, please contact our office, blah, 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 right? And from the public sector side, it was always surveyors are going to be out there for this project. If you have questions about that project, please contact so-and-so.
Mike, can I chime in? I just pulled out my copy. I happen to keep it real close to me and here in my office. But it's basically a little 3-fold page, right of entry, land surveyors, CLSA, and it's basically information about rights, responsibilities for property owners, and then information for law enforcement, information for the actual property owner. And it's broken down, how can you help, information that should be provided to you. Then we go into 8774, of course, Business and Professions Code, And as we move to the back, civil code that is provided here in California, penal code excerpts, and removal of monuments, penal code. And that's basically what it covers. And this was given, you could get, as many as you wanted and be able to hand them out to anybody that you went and did or needed to get on their property, adjoining, adjacent, or whatever that concerned you being able to locate the monument. That's it. And I think we could still
Hey,
I think you could still order these from CLSA. I think they still have copies of them.
from the
Yes, you
federal
can, or you
side,
can download them
go
and
ahead.
print them yourself.
Go for
From
it.
the federal side, there's a little bit different approach. I don't know exactly where it's written down. And this, of course, pertains to BLM surveyors since they work under federal authority. And there is a federal statute that allows a federal surveyor access to the land, but you'd have to go through federal marshals and so forth if you get resistance. And they can be arrested or held aside while the feds get access to be able to get controlling corners or whatever. And I know I kind of pulled that on a couple people a few times. I tried to get access doing some work and they wouldn't give me access. I just came back with a copy of that. I'd have to find it again. I handed it to them, and the last person I remember talking to down here in Genoa, Nevada, they just looked at it, read it, and said, "Oh, I guess I don't have an argument after all." They didn't want to deal with the federal marshal. But that doesn't go for Forest Service surveyors or anything because they're still working under state authority. So that's just for the feds.
I saw a comment here, and I actually felt culprit to it, doing work up in the Lake Arrowhead, Southern California mountains area. And yeah, you got to be careful cutting line and things like that if you're trying to access a point, because you are responsible and you don't want to be cutting down people's trees because all of a sudden you may have to be replanting a type thing. And then, like Steve says, a couple of times doing GLO or BLM surveys out in the Palm Springs area and that type of thing. We've had to have where the marshals have assisted
I did
us.
have to apologize to a landowner down in Genoa. One of my crews who were setting a monument in that little historic town, right in town, controlling to some Forest Service boundaries. This when I was with the BLM doing Forest Service projects. And one of our crews got a little bit too aggressive and he made a bearing tree out of one of the individual's apple trees in their front yard. After I explained what they were doing, and hopefully the tree never died, but he kind of laughed a little bit, and I kind of thought we were going to end up buying a new tree for him, which we would have done, but whatever.
I guess that was a good thing when George Washington chopped down the cherry tree, right? He wasn't no GLO then.
Exactly. That's good stuff. Good points there, Sean and Leaf. I did look at the order form on CLSA, and they do have the door hangers, the flyers, the brochures, all that kind of stuff is on the CLSA's order forms. So
Yeah, I was pretty sure you can still order those by mail and get them by the box.
exactly. Anybody else got anything? We're coming up right on that hour and a half, so everybody's starting to jump
I just want to say thank you to everybody.
Yeah,
Enjoyable having Steve Parrish. I haven't spoke to him in a long time. Back when I was first mentoring is when I met him. He was down at one of the conventions that we had in this area. So
Yeah.
But, always enjoyable, Trent. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Anybody else got anything? Thanks. No?
I think
Monday, go for it.
I think that was a great idea to have some photos of some monuments that have been found. That sounded like a great idea from Steve. And
Yeah, we'll
I'm
look at
looking forward to that. And
we'll
You
look at
know,
how we can incorporate it into a session.
yeah.
There is one quick thing I'd like to ask, and since we're doing mentoring Mondays and you are up to that, does anybody else get on Facebook with any of the other state associations and get involved with any of the other programs that they're offering, such as continuing education classes and that type of stuff that any of the other state associations are offering? I've noticed that Texas is offering some, New Mexico through the university and also their stuff. If you get on Facebook and you join these other state associations, you tend to get information that where you can pick up some of your continuing education units, as well as get information that they're using currently, as well as, you know, if you decide that maybe you want to move to another state, that type of thing as well. So that's just something that I know.
Yeah.
I notice a lot of.
I know I was talking with Nolan in Indiana, and he's going to start a like once a month or every other Tuesday. They're going to do roundtables, so roundtable discussion on Tuesdays. So he's going to start up something.
It's kind of funny, but I've liked almost 33 states out of the union.
Oh, nice.
I get that type of information from everybody.
Yep, exactly.
It's a good
Yeah, great tips, Leaf.
Yep.
I'm on with a couple of them, but I haven't noticed any major activity from them.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to put on the I'm working on the mentoring website is a calendar and trying to put like all the different state association conferences and that kind of stuff coming up.
Nice.
Or that kind of stuff. So I was going to try to have one place for everything, one calendar for everything. So I know NSPS has theirs on the page too, but I think it kind of misses some stuff every once in a while. So try to find all that stuff. But
there's a lot of people out there and a lot
Exactly.
of information, you know, and it's hard. And I'm NSPS as well. So,
Yep.
And like you said, but not everybody, you know, here in California, we're still trying to decide if we want to be an SPS type thing. You know, we're kind of buddy, but at the same time, you know, not an active part of that association. So,
right.
anyhow.
All right. I think we're good. Next Monday is Brandon Montero, and he is not a licensed surveyor, but he's a huge heavy construction layout guy. So some of the stuff that Landon was talking about earlier, grid line layout and that kind of stuff for high rises and stuff, that's heavy construction is going to be Brandon's expertise. So I will be on by about 4:30 or 4:40 or so. I land at 4 o'clock. So I'll be jumping on, but Rob's going to run it as well, and Heather will be getting it started. So next week will be really good with Brandon. I don't know if anybody guys listen to him on the Geoholics, but he's got a lot of wisdom. So
Well, it'll be the same Zoom address, right?
Yep, sure will. All is good there.